Hi, welcome back to Meditate with Samara. I'm so excited. In this episode, I'm bringing you a very close friend of mine, which I am so inspired by. Through our discussions, when we are talking together, he is Ferris Arafi Silitonga, and he is a friend of mine from my undergraduate studies. We did it together in Universitas Gajah Mada in Indonesia, and I am just so inspired by his teaching and his interests in Stoicism, and I'm so excited for you to listen and just understand the world of Stoicism through Ferris's eyes. Welcome, Ferris. Thank you for
Hello
being
there.
here.
Hello to all of you. This is my first podcast ever, so I'm sorry if I might be a bit awkward. But yeah, hi to you as well, Samara. I'm very excited to share what I learned from Stoicism and perhaps what I can teach about it for our practical lives. And perhaps, also something about meditation because I know that Sammy is very enthusiastic about meditations. And yeah, I do know a thing or two about meditation Stoicism, a bit different perhaps from what Sammy learned. But so yeah, let's see a bit about Stoicism.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so excited. I would really love to learn the concept of Stoicism from you, and maybe we can translate it to meditations that's practical and useful for whoever who is listening right now. So I would really like to start to define what Stoicism is, because it's a word that now a lot of people hear, maybe from YouTube or also from the bookstores. But what
Mm,
is Stoicism in your opinion?
all right. So before I begin, I would like to also just spill my rap a bit. So I've been learning Stoicism just a little bit over 2 years now. It's not a bit much, but I delve into two books at least, which is I will introduce later. So I found Stoicism when before I went home from the Netherlands. I thought to myself, yeah, I should bring as many books about philosophy as I can. So I brought books about maybe Kant
Mm.
and maybe some other philosophers that I'm really interested about. And when I came back home and I was having a bit of a hard time adjusting, a bit of anxiety and perhaps depression, that's where I found Marcus Aurelius, one of the Stoic philosophers, one of the most famous probably. And then yeah, that's how and then I started to read it, study it, and then yeah, I got back up thankfully. One of the factors is from studying Stoicism. All right, so what is Stoicism? Like we all heard about it lately. Stoicism is a ancient Greek philosophy which was founded by a guy named Zeno of Citium. The
Mhm.
guy was living alongside Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and it was around 300 BC, so 300 years before Christ or so. And during that time, he oversaw two famous philosophers during the time. The first one is the Cynics who are like Diogenes, if you know the meme about behold a man because it's a feathers biped or something like that.
Okay.
What he saw from the cynics, it's not the modern word of cynical being, as in not wanting to trust anything you hear or something. No.
Hi, welcome back to Meditate with Samara. I'm so excited. In this episode, I'm bringing you a very close friend of mine, which I am so inspired by. Through our discussions, when we are talking together, he is Ferris Arafi Silitonga, and he is a friend of mine from my undergraduate studies. We did it together in Universitas Gajah Mada in Indonesia, and I am just so inspired by his teaching and his interests in Stoicism, and I'm so excited for you to listen and just understand the world of Stoicism through Ferris's eyes. Welcome, Ferris. Thank you for
Hello
being
there.
here.
Hello to all of you. This is my first podcast ever, so I'm sorry if I might be a bit awkward. But yeah, hi to you as well, Samara. I'm very excited to share what I learned from Stoicism and perhaps what I can teach about it for our practical lives. And perhaps, also something about meditation because I know that Sammy is very enthusiastic about meditations. And yeah, I do know a thing or two about meditation, Stoicism. A bit different, perhaps, from what Sammy learned, but so yeah, let's see a bit about Stoicism.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so excited. I would really love to learn the concept of Stoicism from you, and maybe we can translate it to meditations that's practical and useful for whoever who is listening right now. So I would really like to start to define what Stoicism is, because it's a word that now a lot of people hear, maybe from YouTube or also from the bookstores. But what
Mm,
is Stoicism, in your opinion?
all right. So before I begin, I would like to also just build my rep a bit. So I've been learning Stoicism just a little bit over 2 years now. It's not a bit much, but I delve into two books at least, which is I will introduce later. So I found Stoicism when before I went home from the Netherlands. I thought to myself, yeah, I should bring as many books about philosophy as I can. So I brought books about maybe Kant
Mm.
and maybe some other philosophers that I'm really interested about. And when I came back home and I was having a bit of a hard time adjusting, a bit of anxiety and perhaps depression, that's where I found Marcus Aurelius, one of the Stoic philosophers, one of the most famous probably. And then yeah, that's how and then I started to read it, study it, and then yeah, I got back up thankfully. One of the factors is from studying Stoicism. All right, so what is Stoicism? Like we all heard about it lately. Stoicism is a ancient Greek philosophy which was founded by a guy named Zeno of Citium. The
Mhm.
guy was living alongside Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and it was around 300 BC, so 300 years before Christ or so. And during that time, he oversaw two famous philosophers during the time. The first one is the Cynics who are like Diogenes, if you know the meme about behold a man, it's a feathers biped or something like that.
Okay.
What he saw from the Cynics, it's not the modern word of cynical being, as in not wanting to trust anything you hear or something. No, but the Cynic with the capital C is a school of thought where they prioritize your character. So they will disregard anything like your clothing, your possession of external things. They would even live in the street. That's how they want to practice their philosophy because they believe that the sole good in their life is their character. Okay.
Mhm.
So that's a cynic. And at the same time, the Zeno also was inspired by Platonism, the school of Plato.
Mhm.
He saw from it the academics. Zeno was inspired by the schools searching for the truth. They were very intellectual. So from both of these schools, Plato and then from the Cynics, Zeno tried to sort the best of both worlds combination. So in a way, Stoicism is about the development of your character, but at
Mhm.
the same time, while also using the use of your intellectual ability that which all human being has, which is your reason.
Yeah.
So Stoicism is a pretty old philosophy, as you can know, but unfortunately, there's very few surviving works of Stoicism
Mm.
because Stoicism was usually taught under the terrace. So Stoicism was based on the word stoa, which means terrace, with the pillars
Yeah.
under the sun in ancient Greece. So that's where the name came from. But Stoicism was primarily taught by lecture, by verbally. So that's why there's not that many writings survived at that time. And even if there are, a lot of the works was lost during the burning of the Library of Alexandria.
Mm.
Have you heard about it?
No, I haven't actually, but I'm learning so much new things from you. I love it.
Yeah. So in Egypt, once upon a time in Alexandria, there was a collection of wisdom and works from all around the Balkans, Europe, Greece, Italy, and so on. They collected them there, but there's a mishap. There was a firing, and then there's a lot of wisdom lost in there. So yeah. So from today, in modern times, we know Stoicism from primarily three Stoic philosophers. Okay,
Okay.
so I have the books here, actually.
Okay. Awesome. Let's see it.
Okay, so the first one is by Seneca. Here, this
Seneca.
is how the book. Yeah,
Mm,
Seneca.
letters from a Stoic.
Yes, so Seneca was a Roman statesman, and he was living throughout the regime of Nero, and throughout the letters, or we call it in modern times his DMs, he was uh, he was advising his friends on how to adjust with his life. His friend was also one of a statesman, and he was giving him stoic advices,
Mm,
how to get through adversity, how to get through hardship. He was also through the letters told his friend how to go through the grief of her losing son and so on.
mm.
And the next one is Epictetus.
Okay. Epictetus.
Epictetus. Yes.
Discourses and selected writings. Cool.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
So Epictetus, unlike Seneca, he wasn't born a noble. He was actually an ex-slave.
Oh,
So as you can see by now, Stoicism was not only taught by the rich or by the upper class, but also even by the lower,
yeah.
making this philosophy very accessible. Okay, so the story of Epictetus was that he was a slave. When he was a slave, his leg was crippled, but then he didn't let his crippled leg stop him. But
Mm.
instead, it became one of his motivation in his saying that the will is not impeded by your leg, but rather impeded by your will, something like that.
Oh.
So after he got off his slavery, he was studying under this guy named Musonius Rufus.
Musonius Rufus. Okay.
Yes, yes. So he was also a statesman. He was also a teacher of the Stoic school,
Mm.
and this very thin book was collected works of one of his teachings.
Wow.
So Epictetus was under the guidance of Rufus, and then after a while he settled in a city in Greece, and then he started to lecture. So all this book
Uh-huh.
is a collection of his lectures.
Ah.
And there's this guy named Arian who attended his lectures, and then he had this bright idea of, yeah, this guy's lecture is very good. You should write them down all.
Yeah.
So the book is almost like a almost word by word lecture by him. And
Wow.
we are very fortunate that the lecture was recorded, because otherwise we won't even hear them now.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Of course. Thank you so
So
much for sharing that. It's amazing. You, do
yeah,
you still have a third book?
uh, yeah, there is.
Okay.
So wait, let me finish also by Epictetus. So Discourses is about his lecture, but I think one of the most famous and accessible writing of Stoicism is called Enchiridion. It's a very small section of the book.
Hmm.
What it has, this is the title name.
Wow, that's a mouthful. I can't even pronounce that. Enchiridion. Well,
Yes,
that's Latin.
Enchiridion.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically a very refined and distilled wisdom from what Epictetus has from his lectures. So if you're very new, I recommend that I recommend anyone to start from that, because yeah, it's very simple and gives you the gist of what is Stoicism.
Awesome. So just to recap, so Enchiridion is something like a summary. Would you say something
Mm.
like that? The summary distilled of the insights from which book specifically? Can you show it again?
From anything that Epictetus from his lectures,
Okay.
Epictetus.
Epictetus book and the Enchiridion um, part, so you can read all of that. And I would actually try to do that myself because I would love
Mm.
to learn more. Okay,
Mm.
cool.
And the third and probably the most famous Stoic philosopher is Marcus Aurelius. I don't have his book right now because the book is called Marcus Aurelius Meditations. The Meditations book. Marcus Aurelius is a Roman emperor, probably the last good one. He was termed as the last good emperor because after his reign, his son took over, but the Roman Empire kind of fell down.
Mm.
So in his book, it wasn't actually meant to be published or read by anyone else. So it's really creepy to think about it. So,
His
and
personal
after
personal thoughts, right? Like his personal
yes,
writing. Yeah. Okay.
yes. So in this journal, he wrote down to himself all the things he learned from his philosophy teachers, from also Epictetus. So Marcus Aurelius got happened to also read about the lectures from Epictetus, and he was really thankful for it. And in his journal, he also wrote wrote down some words of affirmation to himself, because being a Roman emperor is not really easy, because he had to deal through all the bureaucracy, to all the his enemies in politics, and philosophy was one of his ways of being stable. Let's just say that. And the book was actually very inspiring to read if you were looking for ways to reaffirm yourself and methods how to also practically meditate,
Yeah.
and which we will talk later, of course.
Yeah, I would love to. I actually tried to read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius twice, and I've always been recommended that book, beside from you, from other people when I'm also in my low down state, and then
Mm,
they said and say that this book has given me a lot of inspiration, but I have a problem with understanding, I guess, the English.
mm,
I guess it's
mm,
a
mm,
very hard, it's
mm,
translated from Latin, right?
mm,
So it's not easily understood by me, where are the core learnings. And
mm,
I think what's really good about this conversations with you, and what I really appreciate, is you are an enthusiast and the closest to an expert that I know. You are going to help me understand, help our listeners understand
mm,
all the really good, learnings from Stoicism. So
mm,
I'm really excited too. And also thank you for sharing your journey and what led you to read and learn and continuously try to understand what Stoicism can bring
mm,
to your life. And that's
mm.
really amazing. I really appreciate you for that.
Likewise, likewise for being me here. Mm. So, yeah, it is understandable that Stoicism is quite hard to enter, because you first need to understand also the concepts, the background within it. What Socrates, the probably the wisest philosopher ever on earth, what Socrates have to say, because Stoicism was based on it. But before I get to that, let's talk a bit more about the general opinion about Stoicism. All right.
Yeah.
So, the first thing that probably comes to the mind of people is like, there's a misconception of the philosophy of Stoicism and being a Stoic person. Because if we learn from many mass media, movies, series, for example, when a person was called Stoic, it will probably be a person who is emotionless, who will suppress their emotion, who is probably also distant from other people. But this is actually a misconception, because even though those who are learning Stoic philosophy are usually very stable in their emotion, they do not steer away from it completely, because they understand emotion is a very human part of us. So instead of suppressing them, the Stoic philosopher will understand them. And they will also realize that in the universe that they live in, a Stoic philosopher also realized other people, me and you, we belong to live with each other. So so we are also motivated and have a duty to help each other. It's called a Stoic cosmopolitanism.
Mm.
So we have this belief that wherever you go, it's your city, it's your home. There's no need for distinction of what country you're from, what background you're from. We're all human beings with the same dignity, with the same reason, and so forth.
That's really humbling because
Mm,
if I look and pay attention to the media these days, we're in one of the times that are so divided and in a lot of different topics, and I think it's
mm,
very humbling.
mm.
This stoicism,
Cosmopolitanism. It's a very it's a
cosmopolitanism.
tongue twister. Yes.
Sounds weird, but yeah,
Mm,
we understand. I think the general notion of it, and what's interesting is you mentioned that the Stoics or who one of the misconception is that people say that a stoic person suppresses their emotion,
mm,
but stoicism itself, they
mm,
understand that emotions are an important part of life
mm, mm,
and
mm,
regulate it instead in the many ways
mm.
that we'll discuss after this. And why
Yeah.
I say that is interesting and important because I actually learned that in school when I did my master's degree. It has a little bit of philosophy and neuroscience behind it. And
Mm,
when people actually suppress their emotions, they're so much more unhappier rather than
mm,
those who can learn to regulate their emotions. And when they
mm,
suppress, it means that they're bottling up. They don't
mm,
show the sign of emotion like how media says a stoic person is, but the healthier
mm,
way of processing these emotions, which will happen
mm,
a lot of the times because you are, of course, in interaction with other people, right?
mm,
That
mm,
you have to either learn how to reframe or rethink how you see this
exactly.
information and this processes, or
Mm,
you change the situation in which where you can control or cannot
mm,
control. And I believe this is
mm,
something that we'll dive
mm,
in deeper after this. So I totally agree with that philosophy because it's been scientifically proven as well. And
mm,
maybe I'll find some papers and put it in the description later for the
mm,
listeners to check out. So cool. I want to continue actually to
mm,
go into deeper of the foundations of stoicisms. Is that
mm.
cool?
Of course,
Yeah.
but it will be a bit of a mouthful. So I hope I won't be too much, and I hope it's understandable,
Yeah.
because knowing the foundation of Stoicism is actually important in order to understand what it is that makes it so helpful.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
agree.
So, all right. So I just want to respond to what you said about bottling and suppressing your emotion, because the more that I learn about all this philosophy, the more I'm convinced that the crux of the matter is what we actually want, and what the emotion actually want is to be understood.
Mm,
What I mean by that is, what they want to be known, what's their reason for having that kind of emotion, because yeah, otherwise you're bottling it up and you will be stuck with their emotion, being deaf, not being able to express themselves.
yeah. I love
Yeah,
that you
and I can.
I love that because I also agree that emotions are information. When your body
Mm,
feels any emotion, it's
mm,
telling you to be aware and what is it trying to tell you what you need at that
mm,
moment.
mm.
Yeah.
All right. So the Stoic components. When we are learning Stoicism, we even from the modern writers, the intro to Stoicism, they will say the three disciplines or the three components which are important to Stoicism.
Mm.
The three are called physics, logic, and ethics. So let's begin one by one.
Yep.
So when we talk about physics, the Stoic would like to observe how the universe works, basically how people work, how we became here, and from their study of the universe, they've seen that the universe is ever changing. So if you ever heard the term "nature is change," that's basically it. So and afterwards, they come to know how human beings come right now, and they learn that yeah, human beings have higher rate of survival. For example, if they come together, create communities, help together, basically. So yeah, this is it's important to know this, because it's also important later to remember when I mention our meditation techniques.
Yeah.
So the second component is called logic. So uh, we also learn about the nature of human beings, right, from also physics. And we know and we realize that we are a creature with a faculty of reasoning. And this is important because this faculty lets you to choose what is good, what is bad, lets you judge, and lets you decide. And it's also especially important because it lets you to reach the truth by shifting all through the, sorry if I might swear, bullshit
Yeah.
that people might say to you, So in order for you to see behind the veil and reach the truth. It is also important, especially regarding your emotion, because sometimes you are clouded with judgments or way of thinking which are unhealthy, and we can actually use reasoning in order to shift past through the cloud
Yeah.
and make the way of thinking clearer or healthier. So I still recall that there are certain misconceptions also about thinking, like whether you're thinking too much, or if you're an overthinker, your mental health will automatically go down. But it's not like so, because as human beings, we automatically think a lot.
I agree.
What what matters is the quality of your thoughts. So what we need to work on instead is not by suppressing our thinking, but actually to guide our thinking on a better way of how to think about the things that approaches us, the circumstances, our emotions, so on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's actually really useful that you highlight that, and we're learning that as one of the um, components of Stoicism. Because when I learned from my meditation trainings and practices, is that when our thoughts come, we can't just hold on to it, and that's one of the automatic reactions when we have these thoughts. And when we're holding on to these thoughts and we get clouded by our judgments, we're not making the right decisions, and we're not saying the most right or beneficial things. Like we might hurt other people or ourselves when we are clouded by this judgment. So understanding that that's a good component and that it will pass, especially if you can reframe your thinking to something that's more beneficial and healthier to you. That's some thing that you have to learn continually as a life for a lifetime. That's really
Exactly.
cool. Yeah.
We also have to continually learn about new things on Earth. Yeah, that's one of the many features of Stoicism, but I will explain later, of course. So there's physics, there's logic, and the third, and probably the most important,
Mm.
no, most popular actually,
Okay.
is called ethics, because ethics is all about how a Stoic will approach life, how
Mm.
they act. So we not only contemplate, not only we think about things, and we don't want to get stuck in intellectualizing things have and with them having no practical effect at all. But instead, the Stoic will also put it an important component that we also act according to what we think is right, what our logic think is right also, based on our reason. So the Stoic also have this term called living with nature.
Mm.
And that means with the nature of you as a human being. That means living with the things that you were already given with. For example, you have emotions, so you have to live with it and you cannot avoid it. You also were given the faculty of reasoning,
Yeah.
how to do logic. So you also have to sort of practice how to use your reasoning abilities. And it was said that if you live by nature, if you live according to what you have, you will have a peaceful life because you're not going against them. You're making use of what was given to you.
Wow. That's really mind blowing. It's so simple, but I think it's a life changing understanding once you understand that there is a need for it. And I
Mm,
guess I would also like to ask you actually for a bit, what why do you think Stoicism is such a popular
mm,
learning and understanding a topic?
mm,
And this question is actually by
mm,
Andrew Yoel. He asked
mm,
on Instagram. I really like to address that because I don't know, there's just something so mind blowing about
mm, mm.
philosophy. Can you explain
Okay.
a little bit about that?
So I guess if I observe lately about people selling books, I guess there's been an increase in interest of self-help books.
Mm.
So if you're a cynic, you will think of it like, oh, they're just out making money and so forth. But it's not exactly like that. I saw, I read an article where it cites research about millennials. even though it's just the US, but it can also translate to other parts of the world because, yeah. So in the study, it said that millennials, compared to the generation before, they put a lower value of themselves.
Mm,
Instead, they put a higher value on externals
mm,
and external achievements.
mhm.
So we can see that we can actually correlate this with the increasing amount of anxieties and depression. Well, of course, you can actually debate it because millennials, they will most likely and will more often report their mental health compared to the previous generation, which is more secretive about it. But we can also see from this correlation, and it can actually explain itself because the more that you put more value towards things, and if you have nothing to value on yourself, what will happen if the externals that you put so much value on actually is failing? For example, you might not get the job you want, you might not get the relationship you want. So if all these things you put value on
Yeah.
crumbles, there's nothing else inside of you. And you can say that there's no foundation. When there's no foundation, the building becomes very fragile. And what we mean by foundation is, as the article stated, that that our generation is actually currently lacking in a philosophy of life, a
Mm,
philosophy in which they put value in themselves as a human being, that they have a dignity and self-worth that's not dictated by external value. And yeah, and our current generation just so happened as it's not, they don't really reflect on this kind of thing,
yeah.
not so much. So this is where Stoicism kind of help alongside with many other philosophies and other self-help books and guides, that we will also need to shift that value inside ourselves again.
Mm,
And by doing that, we can also improve our mental health being and live a more colorful life.
yeah. Thank you for that beautiful answer, and also you're just so well read with the article because there is so much truth to it, and I relate and resonate so much with what you and what the article said, that we often put too much mm, point and too much power of external validation, and we also don't tend to self-reflect as much as we can to keep a healthy mental life and mental well-being.
Mm,
And I understand that we as human beings, we all want to have a good life, and we
mm,
want to avoid any types of suffering, whether that's mental and whether that's physical. And I'm curious to know, what
mm.
have you read about philosophies from Stoicism that says anything about that specifically?
So I think there's this quote which I really like, which was also cited by Immanuel Kant, which is like so many thousands years later. The Stoics would say that compare yourself to a jewel. The jewel will have value in itself.
Mm,
It is not affected by the praise of others or the lack of it, and which means that you, like a jewel, must also realize your self-dignity as a human being, which I will also actually talk later because I want to talk also about the one of the other foundation of Stoicism, which is Socrates, which talks exactly why this happened, why this quote came to being.
wow. Wow, I love that. I'm already so inspired, and I feel like I have to evaluate my values too, because I am also very often thinking about what other people think of me. Like it just happens because it's if we trace back biologically and evolutionary, we think of others validation as a means of survival, because you want to
Exactly.
be respected in a group so you can survive more. And I think that's so
Mm,
deeply wired in our brains. But it's
mm,
good to know that in this time and age where validation can be seen, not only what Ferris has said with the jobs you get or the relationships, but
mm,
very simply on social media, for example, how many friends you have, how many likes you get, how many views. And I think if we always constantly try to validate ourselves through that number or metric that is so easily seen, um, you can't take care of yourself very well.
Mm, mm.
And it's good to be a jewel and understand yourself like a jewel. I,
Exactly.
yeah.
So, but it is not to say that anything external of us is completely should be ignored. No. What Stoicism teaches is that you should take them wisely.
Mm,
It's like, so life was likened to being playing a game of ball.
mm,
So you're in a game or you're in life, and you are given a ball. So your job is to play with the ball as good as you can. But once the game is over, you don't need to be possessive about the ball
mm,
anymore. What I'm saying is that even externals, they have some uses, of course. For
mhm,
example, compliments from others, they can give you much feedback, and certainly we cannot deny that they also make you feel good, right? So what we must understand that is that we should not be dependent on them, because what if you're so dependent on praises, whenever you don't have any more praises, what would you feel like? That's the dangerous part. And we cannot say also that no, you don't need a job completely, you don't need a relationship completely. No, you need a job in order to live, and you need a relationship in order to build your character, in order to build your personality and develop it further,
yeah.
especially like that. Because yeah, Stoicism puts a lot of importance on the excellence of your character, and we strive to improve it as much as we can
Mm,
when with through circumstances.
yeah. That's such a key understanding, to always get information but not be dependent on externals. So if
Mm,
we are not dependent on externals, so we have to take responsibility within ourselves and our character. Is that
mm,
correct? I've
yes.
I've read something about, and this is not always attributed to Stoicism, but I would love to know if this originated in Stoicism, which is try to stay within your locus of control, or
Mm,
in a way be responsible for what you can control, and if you can't
mm,
control it, then don't worry about it. I think there's this quote
yes.
from Dalai Lama that I really like. I
Yeah.
don't, it's kind of related, but I just wanted to say it because I really like it. So
Yeah.
if you have a problem, basically, if you can do something about it, why
Mm,
worry? And if you
mm,
can't do something about it, why worry? So I'm like, yeah, that's so
mm,
true. Like if it's in my locus of control and there's something that I worry about, I will do something about it. But if it's
mm,
externally something that I can't control, like people's reactions and just what people say,
mm,
then I shouldn't worry about it. And I just
mm,
love
mm,
that. I don't know. I was wondering
mm.
what Stoicism say about this locus of control.
That's perfectly what Stoic ethics is all about, actually.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, it's called the dichotomy of control because you only have two things in life: the things you can control and the things that you cannot. But how Stoic got to this conclusion, however, I can also explain first,
Yes, please.
if you may.
Of course, let's do it. We'd love to.
Okay, so we learn about the physics, logic, and ethics, right?
Hmm.
So let's talk about a bit about Socrates. Do you know about Socrates,
Not as much as
Sammy?
I'm sure. I will knowing you.
So I think Socrates was the most famous. I think he is the most famous philosopher, Western philosopher ever, because he's the first who developed the Socratic questioning, how to inquire further towards the truth, and so on. And he's probably the father of philosophy. Like all the many schools that we have right now is based on his inquiry towards the general public, because he keeps on haggling people on the street, on the market. He for questions such as, "Do you know what a good man is?" Wow. And of course, each person has their kind of questions, right? And this is what, and Socrates will like to dig deeper on each of the question, each of the answers that his respondent have.
Mm.
And from his life, he developed two key ethics theory that Stoics will also follow. Let's go to the first one. The first one is that Socratic ethics says that uh, good and evil only resides within you,
Mm.
in your own will alone. So, for example, if someone harms you, perhaps physically or verbally, you might actually not be harmed at all because, and this is important, because the sole decider of good and evil is actually within your will.
Mm.
So this is important, like especially being a dual, like I said before.
Yeah.
It's important because you as a soul carrying a will, soul and will is actually the same, or whatever. As a soul,
Yeah.
you actually are the one who will decide whether the things outside of you affects you or not.
Mm.
So if you let those harmful things affect you badly, then you can say that you became a bad person because you're the one who decide for yourself how you respond, how you act, and so forth,
That's interesting.
something like that. And the second theory, Socratic ethics, is that people do wrong out of ignorance. They
Mm.
don't do it willingly because he argues that what kind of person would like to do mistakes willingly? So this is quite a humbling ethical theory because um, well, let me think about it first. It's quite humbling because people just don't know any better when they do mistakes, and it makes you become kinder to yourself and to others whenever they make mistakes, because either you teach them to be better or they will keep on making mistakes, and that there is no reason for you to be angry towards them if all the mistakes that they've done is due to ignorance or due to knowing any better,
Mm.
something like that. And this theory was also emphasized by Epictetus, that we shouldn't be angry towards others when they make mistakes because it's like being angry with a person being blind, because a person who is ignorant is blind, perhaps not physically, but intellectually.
Wow.
So it's our job actually to be kinder, to let them know how to be better, stuff like that. Likewise to ourselves, we shouldn't curse ourselves together whenever we do mistakes. It's actually an innocent mistake when if we think about it, because it's just that we don't know any better.
Yeah.
And because of this, it's also our duty to keep on learning, to be a lifelong learner, how to do better.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ferris. That is such an important lesson. And while I'm hearing, I kind of have a little bit of goosebumps because I so agree. And I've recently learned and talked to someone as well that when people do make mistakes, we have to be forgiving because they're acting from their understanding of the world and their
Exactly.
towards the world, and we are all in a different spectrum of consciousness, self-awareness, and self-inquiry. So for people who do make mistakes one time and two times and without self-inquiry, they can do it multiple times. But the most important part is realizing when we do make a mistake, we are kind towards ourselves and then we try to learn from it. And that's why you also said, I hope, about lifelong learning. And I think it just resonates so much because we see ourselves and other people humbly as on the same level. There's no anyone who is smarter, better, or in what other way. Or I believe that I just don't want to think that I'm better than another person or another
Hmm.
person is lower than me. And I think it's so important
Hmm.
for that to be reminded, to have more compassion not only for other people but also for ourselves. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So let's also kind of reflect about the world. For example, we also see news of people doing crimes, stealing, mugging, murdering, for example. And from Socratic words, we can explain that they're actually doing that because they believe it's the right thing to do.
Mm.
So of course, so the justice system, if we are actually doing it the Socrates way, isn't to punish them actually, but it's to lead them towards being a better person. And I believe also this is actually a better way to also make people learn from their mistake, because if you are giving justice out of just punishing,
Mm.
or because out of your emotion of malice of hating them,
Mm.
they're not going to get any better,
Wow.
something like that.
I
And
think
it's kind of tragic too when you think about it, because when you hear when when I say that they're just doing the right thing that they believe to do, it's because they're also pressured by their circumstances to do what they have to do, is to be like that. So yeah, why don't we give them more compassion instead on how to be a better person?
yeah,
Because
yeah. I think that's a very lovely view, especially when we are talking to people or before we judge someone, we never really see the whole story and experience behind the decisions that we see on the outside. So yeah, I think that's something we all can reflect on.
you can even apply it to your emotion as well,
How so? How do we do that?
because yeah, you develop certain ways of thinking, right?
Mm.
And it will lead you to certain emotions, perhaps unhealthy ones.
Mhm.
But instead of scorning them, instead of suppressing them, you want to lead your line of thinking towards the right way of healthier way of doing things, of emotion.
Yeah,
Does it make sense?
it
This
does.
is also what this is also what I meant by reframing. Also, in what you have learned, is to also lead also yourself towards a better way of thinking, towards a better person overall.
Yeah. And I think I really appreciate everyone who does that, that they question their life and they examine what they do when they learn from it. I think it's one of the really good qualities of a person, aside of being curious and humble and nice. But the person who can think that way is sure to learn a lot. And that's really interesting to remind ourselves. Cool. So about this thinking about what we should do and how we reframe our situations to better manage our emotions. I understand that with philosophy, there's a lot of contemplation, especially these books, the three books that you mentioned, or four actually, are are based on the contemplations of people from the past, and I believe that it's popular now because the truth remains quite constant, and that's why people are picking up on it too. And for my experience, I like to process at least my emotions and my thoughts through journaling, for
Mm,
example, or meditating. And
mm.
I'm just very curious if you've had read or you've experienced something from Stoicism or inspired by Stoicism in terms of self-contemplation.
Actually, whenever the thought arises, whenever I'm about to sleep, I couldn't, and I have thoughts. I actually have a journal where I write whatever thoughts I have. If I feel like reciting one of the lines from one of the many books, I usually have a few journals ready in order to process what I thought about. At the same time, I also use the journal to contemplate about my emotion. Whenever I feel disturbed, I will directly write in a journal what I feel like currently. And then from there, I try to examine what is it that made me feel that way, so as to get to the root of it.
Yeah.
Because this is one of the many foundation of Stoicism, and I actually want to talk about also,
Yeah.
that this is a quote from Epictetus.
Mm-hmm.
He said that it is not the thing itself, that disturbs us, but rather our opinion of it.
Mm.
And this is a very foundation of the emotion, the theory of emotion of Stoicism. This actually became one of the theory for cognitive behavioral therapy, for psychotherapy.
Yeah.
The guy was inspired by this very quote that whenever you're feeling unwell, it's actually because of the judgments and the opinion you have towards yourself.
Mm.
So, as a Stoic philosopher, or perhaps the job of the therapist, it is our job and their job to know what is it that made you form that certain opinion. And once you learn the reason, you also have to reframe them or re-guide them towards a better way of thinking in order to make it more reasonable.
Yeah. I love that you also mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy because I'd like to share a little bit of my experience with it. When I was suffering with a lot of depression and anxiety, I met a psychiatrist and I was introduced to this technique. And I have since tried to use it every time I have more episodes of being in the down low, basically. And uh,
Mm,
just to share with our listeners, my understanding and my experience of CBT is that you write down the thoughts that you're having, and then what in the next column or the next line is how do you feel based on these thoughts. And then the next one is how would you rather reframe these thoughts into a more
mm,
positive light, or
mm,
what Ferris has discussed within the Stoicism philosophy and trying to reframe your emotions in a certain way. And why
mm,
this is useful, I believe, for me is first the act of writing my thoughts down makes me believe that I am not really my thoughts. Like I can just
mm, mm, mm,
write down these thoughts and I observe, and it makes me feel like this kind of release.
mm,
And then the
mm,
second step, it helps me cognitively reassess because
mm,
it's hard for our minds to multitask everything that we're doing and
mm,
also reflect on it in our own heads. Like we can
mm,
do it, but it's
mm,
extremely not easy. And
mm,
it's much easier to do it on paper because then you can assert your reasoning
mm,
to why is this thought? What is
mm,
this emotion, this feeling caused by this thought
mm, mm,
trying to inform me? And what can I do
mm,
with it?
mm,
And
mm,
it gives a much proactive light onto the steps that are healthy
mm,
in order to take the information from this
mm.
emotion. So,
Yes, yes.
what I'm saying is that I really love that you say that, and it's something from Stoicism that created a philosophy that's useful for us up until now through CBT, for example.
Mm,
So
mm,
it's really cool.
mm. Oh, I would actually want to clarify one thing from what you said. So
Please.
what we want to reframe is not our emotion.
Mm,
Remember, what we want to reframe is our way of thinking.
okay. Okay.
So CBT, Stoicism, they have this theory that your final emotion, it was caused by the line of thought
Mm-hmm.
that you that made you feel that way. So
Yeah.
what you want to fix is not the resulting emotion because it's just a reflection of your thoughts.
Yeah.
What you want to examine is actually the thoughts, the line of thinking, the logic behind your judgments, behind your opinion that leads you to feel that way.
Wow. Thank you
For
for that.
example,
Yeah, yeah,
here
yeah.
I'll give you an example.
Yes.
You're rejected from a job
Mm-hmm.
or from the person that you like.
Mm-hmm.
It brings you down.
Yeah.
However, upon examination, what made you feel down is actually because the rejection part makes you feel like you are not good enough. But we can say from Stoicism that this is actually not true
Mm.
because your self-worth is not entirely dependent on the on the person who accepts or rejects the thing from you. And the second reasoning is that actually the person or the thing that rejects or accepts you is not actually within your control at all. So
True.
even though from what you do, there's actually still a chance outside forces might not align with what you want.
Mm. That's
Mm.
humbling.
And yes, and speaking of that, let's talk about the dichotomy of control from Stoicism, the
Mhm.
things that we can and we cannot control.
Yeah.
So, so we still remember, right, from Socrates, good and evil is all within us, not from outside of us.
Mhm.
From that, they also refined that theory into this thing called dichotomy of control.
Mhm.
The dichotomy of control is the things that we can and the things that we cannot. And he also states what is good and what is evil.
Mhm.
Hmm. And here, listen to me because this is kind of important. So, what is good and what is evil? Of course, there will be a question about it, right? Good, according to Stoicism, is called virtue.
Yeah.
So, virtue is actually based on a Greek word, but if we refine it further into modern English, it means excellence, excellence of quality. So, you want to nurture the good within you by being virtuous, by improving your character.
Mhm.
And the evil is actually the opposite of the virtues. I can explain it later. So, what are virtues exactly? So, virtues are like values which Stoicism will strive to achieve. The first one is wisdom. Wisdom is knowing better, wanting the truth, using your faculty of reasoning in order to process information and so on. So that's wisdom. Then there's justice. Justice will be you wanting to treat others fairly, wanting to be honest, wanting to fulfill your promises,
Mhm.
not lying,
Mhm.
stuff like that. And then there's courage. Courage means your ability to be resilient against the hardship that you may face in life.
Yeah.
So sometimes there are things that stop us from doing things, right?
Yeah.
That's actually a vice. And we can actually say to ourselves that our fear was baseless or not based on reason. And through courage, we can go through all the hardships we got in life.
Mhm.
So it's actually so the goal of Stoicism is actually not to reduce suffering, not to avoid it,
Mhm.
but in order to get through it, to accept that it is happening to me, but the me inside of me is not truly harmed. I'm still a good person, regardless of what's happening in the world.
Wow.
So you also start to rely on yourself because when the world is all tumbling down, all you got to rely on is yourself, the
Yeah.
thing that you can actually control.
Yeah.
Okay. And the last virtue is called temperance. Temperance means like deferring your choice to another time, holding off from doing something that you think might be helpful, might be harmful,
Mm.
something like that.
Okay.
And then there's the good and evil is all within you, the things that you can control.
Yeah.
So it's like a daily job for a Stoic to behave themselves to achieve good.
Mm.
And the things outside of us, it's called an indifferent.
Okay.
So we call them an indifferent because they're neither good or evil. And you gotta take note. They're neither good or and evil because I see you're moving.
Yeah.
Good and evil,
There's a
good
other
and
person outside. Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
So good and evil is is a judgment that you give from yourself.
Mm.
It's neither formed by others or from the circumstances. And indifference are called like so because they're neither harmful or neither useful, but they can be useful. For example, getting a job, building friendship, building building relationship. But
Mm.
we call them indifferent, such that we don't become too dependent on those indifference whenever they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So it's a good way of also reflecting upon the locus of control, like you said, that good or bad in life is up to you to decide.
Mhm.
And the it's also by this we can also be more able to separate the things from the externals. So if
Yeah.
you are disturbed by the externals, we should also reflect and stop and think that no, they're disturbing me because I have the judgment that they are bad. However, this is actually not so. They are bad only because I said so.
Mm.
Even though if I just stop calling them bad, calling them harmful to me, that thing outside of us will no longer harm us.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's one of the really important things, I think, and truth that I feel like would make our life less, I wouldn't say stressful because life could be stressful, but
Mm,
I think it could make life easier from the
mm,
complexity of your mind and how you judge the world. And, when you're in a low period, whether you are struggling with mental health issues,
mm,
sometimes you don't know for sure what's going on, like you're
mm,
so clouded. And I really love what you just explained because this dichotomy of control gives a sense of hope and empowerment towards ourselves. Because usually, when we're so anxious or depressed, we feel like there's no hope or we are
mm,
powerless.
mm.
But in truth, what Ferris has been saying and what I agree is that we have more power than we think we do, and
Exactly.
that's really something that we have control to work on and to
Mm,
improve.
mm. And one of the things I've had after learning Stoicism is I have a lot more self-esteem towards myself because before that, no one told me or no one made me realize that I actually have so much power over my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you before that, I just let whatever circumstances outside of me affect me and let me feel down. But afterwards, I'm more confident in facing the things I have in life because I know they can stop worrying me if I want to and whenever I decide to.
Yeah,
That's just the amount of power you have. You can stop letting things worry you just by your decision.
thank you so much for that and sharing that because you can build so much resilience. And I'm so proud to see and hear that you are resilient and you're sharing these really beautiful knowledge to our listeners. And I really appreciate you for that. That's thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. We have a bit more time, and I would like to jump into a similar topic, if that's okay,
Of
regarding
course.
what Stoicism thinks about meditation. I think we just
Mm,
in
mm,
the introduction that we're gonna dive into that,
mm,
and I'm really interested to know if I would meditate on the many truths that you were just saying. What would you recommend me to do? Like, where should I start, or
mm,
what is the best way to start
mm,
reflecting and
mm,
meditating?
mm. Personally, I would use a journal, but that's because maybe because I'm a visual learner
Mm-hmm.
that I need to note down whatever I'm thinking. But this is also helpful to note down what you're thinking because it helps you to know the structure of how you are thinking.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I noticed from meditations based on Stoicism and based on Buddhism is that there's not much physical activity required in Stoicism, unlike, for example, of you doing yoga, doing your physical exercises, something like that. But I believe you can actually combine it. So whenever you do yoga, you can perhaps recite some of the lines that the Stoic philosophers have. I actually did that when I was working out. So when I'm working
Yeah,
out and I'm feeling awful and I want to read for myself, I just have a book open right next to me while I'm just lifting,
yeah,
and so that the way of thinking of Stoicism sticks on me.
yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. I do have like these. I start my yoga practice, whether I'm self practicing or guiding other people. I always remind them to first set an intention, a few simple words that you want to bring into your practice,
mm,
and
mm,
just based on whatever you're feeling that day or what you want to cultivate
mm,
more in your life.
mm,
And
mm,
in the middle of a practice, whenever we're like more in a grounding state or a still moment after a lot of
mm,
movements, I'd remind them
mm,
again, remind myself,
mm,
please remind yourself what's the intention and
mm,
this practice, and if you felt anything different regarding that, and just stay with it.
mm,
So there
mm.
is a sense of reflection that I try to bring into the practice, and I love that you're also doing something similar. I think it's fun. I think it's useful. Yeah.
Yeah. But using a journal was really helpful to me because what we've discussed before, we want to get into the root of our way of thinking, right? So at first, I would write, what is this emotion that I'm feeling right now? So I want to acknowledge that emotion, whether
Mhm.
I'm sad, whether I'm upset, whether I'm angry. You don't want any kind of spices around it, saying things other than your emotion. You
Mm.
want the truth, you want the emotion that you are feeling right there, right now.
Mhm.
And then after I feel this emotion, I will write down mm, what I actually wanted that perhaps I failed to achieve that may lead to that emotion. I
Mhm.
will write down also all the potential reasoning on why perhaps I would feel that way.
Mm.
And then after doing that, after doing those two things, I will reflect upon what I wrote, what the line of reasoning is. And on the third step, I will try to reframe my way of thinking, perhaps when I learn about Stoicism or from my own reasoning
Mm.
that it doesn't make sense for you to think that way,
Mhm.
and so on. Because once you reframe your thinking, your emotions automatically follow.
Yeah.
So you don't have to take care. You don't have to mess around much with your emotion, but you have to put more importance on your way of thinking.
Yeah.
But that's this is also the thing that I want to say is that uh, when you're facing a situation, for example, someone surprised you from behind, someone punch you, someone tell you bad news,
Mhm.
you will automatically feel bad, right? You
Mm.
will feel automatically surprised. You will feel automatically angry,
Mhm.
sad, and that's okay. That's natural. The
Mhm.
Stoics acknowledge that right after the event happened to you will feel something. Hmm. But what you need to take care on is the after this event, after the emotion,
Mhm.
such that you don't continuously have this negative feeling towards you. It
Mm.
is unreasonable for you to sad for a very long time, even though there's a way for you to cope with that sadness. It
Yeah.
is unreasonable for you to be hateful to the one that made you angry initially, because Stoicism doesn't like anger at all. It's not useful
Mm.
because according to them, if you have anger, you will lose your sense of self control.
Yeah.
When you're angry, you are letting the other person be your master, as if you're the slave.
Yeah.
So whatever your master do, you're just doing what a slave does, which is to follow according to them.
Yeah.
So it is recommended that we should not be angry at all, or be hateful towards another, because we don't want the externals to control us. We want to regain control towards ourselves.
I love that. Um, I like that you said about anger is not useful, because I have also learned back when I was doing my master's, I read these papers and we also had like a whole subject about it, that when we have emotions, either positive or negative, like you're angry or you're elated, super happy, you're not making the most reasonable decisions, because
Mm,
in our brain, our emotions and our line of reasoning cannot
mm,
work together at the
mm,
same time. So refrain from making any big decisions when you're in any state of extreme emotions, whether you're super happy or you're super angry. I
mm,
think is such an important thing to learn, because if
mm,
you do act, say, based on your emotions, which we are
mm,
learning that we can change through changing our thoughts, that rises
mm,
this emotion,
mm,
is a really good practice to do,
mm,
because our brains can do it.
mm,
It's scientifically proven. So
mm,
make decisions on a colder state rather
mm,
than when you're hot
mm,
with emotion. So
mm.
that's pretty
Exactly.
cool.
So what I explained about writing on the journal is actually a Stoic way of mindfulness.
Mm,
So the Stoic of mindfulness is you don't actually need to wait for a journal. You can just start right now, start living your life, and then whenever you feel like something, you think about something, you can directly stop, maybe do some breathing in order to regain yourself, and then ask yourself, what is it that I'm feeling, and so forth. You
mm,
can actually go into the roots of your thinking, way of thinking, without journals. You can even integrate it, I think, with your yoga practices.
yeah,
Something maybe for you to do next
I will.
during
I
your
will
next
try. I will try. I'm learning so much from you, and it's so amazing to see that there is many things that we can start doing, because of course it's easy to understand, but it's harder to do in real life
mm,
when you are faced with this emotion. And I was really wondering if there is practical tips that our listeners can try at home after listening to this podcast that is very inspiring.
mm,
What can they do to start incorporating more stoicism and regulating their emotions and
mm,
improving themselves through
mm,
contemplation? Is there anything you'd recommend to our listeners?
mm. Okay, so one of the first things that I learned to stop doing, which is a bad habit, is to stop with the self-deprecating talk regarding yourself or regarding the events. So you should stop saying that you are a bad person, you're dumb, you're stupid, and so on. No,
No go.
stop with that. No,
Mm,
because Marcus Aurelius said in his journal that your mind will take on the character of your most frequent thoughts, and your souls are died by your thoughts.
wow.
And similarly, you can continue that line of thought
Mm,
that your emotion, your souls, and the way of your thinking are developed by the way you act. This
mm,
means also the way you say, the way you say about yourself, the way you say about events.
mm,
So the less I judge about myself or the circumstances, the better you will be. I can guarantee you that.
mm. Okay. Let's
The
judge.
next tip,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, last judgment about things. Yes. The next tip will be, yeah, breathing exercises work. So whenever you feel disturbed, if you can, stop right away. Take some rest. Take some retreat for yourself. Maybe do some breathing exercise and reflect upon yourself. What's happening? What's in your thoughts, and so on. And for those who want to start Stoicism, the most practical tip I can give you is to actually read the book, because there's only so much I can tell you. And lots of the wisdom contained in Stoicism are actually contained in the writing, how to act, how to think about things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this term called therapeutic reading, which means that you can feel better the more you read good things.
Ah,
One of the things is Stoicism, also
wow.
books about Stoicism.
Yeah, I'll make sure to write the books that you recommend in the description, just to make sure that people can continue with their further resources after this very
Mm.
light conversation.
Of course.
Okay. And so what's interesting as well, that we've actually talked a lot regarding the meditation and stoicism, I'm interested to know if you can cite um, something that's interesting and useful as an example for
Mm-hmm.
when we are contemplating or meditating, because you did give an example that you were reading while you were doing some exercise, or for me
Mm-hmm.
for my yoga next time. Is there
Mm.
anything that we can start with?
I can perhaps give you some quotes. Well,
Yeah.
I already gave you quotes before this talk happened. Perhaps you can give them later in the Instagram post, in the pictures, the quotes I give you. But the quotes are very helpful in ways that, because the quotes are very vivid and they are quite they give imagery, and
Mm,
this is useful to build up imageries or visuals in your head,
mhm.
so as to also be on somewhere else
Yeah.
or be in a better circumstance.
Yeah.
For example, I'll give you this one quote from Marcus Aurelius.
Mhm.
He said that all is as thinking makes it so, that the circumstances is just how you judge it so, good or bad,
Mhm.
and that you control your thinking. So remove your judgments whenever you wish, and then there is calm, as the sailor rounding the cape finds smooth water and welcome the waveless bay.
Wow. I'm a bit speechless. There's so much truth in like 10 seconds. That's really, really good.
I really like rereading also the quotes. Give me peace of mind also when I read them.
Yeah, it reminds you too what are important things, right?
Mm.
So thank you so much, Ferris, for so many things that you have explained to us kindly in what you have read so far.
Mm.
And I really would like to end this podcast and this conversation with some questions that we have
Mm.
asked on both my Instagram and Ferris's Instagram. And I would love to address all of them if possible, because
Yes, please. My friends are very enthusiastic, and I would like to answer any questions that they have.
yes, and I would really love to help as much people as we can with this conversation. And let's start with the first one. So this is a question from Giovanni, and he asks,
Mhm.
what do Stoics say about the meaning of life? And what is an accomplished life for a Stoic? This question is,
Hmm.
all these questions are a lot to handle, but we'll
Very deep.
try to give our best. Ferris
Hmm.
will try to give his best. It's his expertise.
Okay, so when we're talking about the meaning of life, we have to answer two questions. The first one is, where does that meaning of life comes from?
Mm,
If you're religious, it may come from God. But if you're not, perhaps it can come from yourself, or from what you do, or from what you experience later in life. And the second question is, what is it exactly, that meaning of life? So the Stoics will contemplate also this question. And Marcus Aurelius mentioned to himself that either this world was a product of a god, or whether this world was a product of randomness of atoms. If either of that, we shouldn't be purposeless ourselves.
mm,
So to the Stoics, the source of that meaning of life could come from anywhere. But if I have to take the meaning of life exclusively from the Stoics, it is to live according to nature,
mm,
according to what you have, and to develop them, to develop virtues. And that is pretty much the accomplished life for a Stoic, when they continuously strive for excellence. But of course, to some people, this might be quite a bit shallow, because you're just improving just for the sake of improving. There's no other meaning you can attach it to.
mm,
Well, in a way, you're right, because Stoics don't need to attach it to any other externals. But in case you'd like, there's various other philosophies that could be complementary to Stoicism. Let me also answer my friend's question,
yeah.
in which she said, "What other philosophy schools can be complementary to Stoicism?" such as could it be absurdism, existentialism, and so on. And I can say that a lot of it. You can use absurdism. For example, absurdism was made by Albert Camus, and
Mm.
Albert Camus was actually reading Stoic books when he was hospitalized. So he used the books in order to help him to be alive. And absurdism is all about knowing how to get through life regardless of circumstances and rebel against the nothingness that is nihilism.
Mm.
And if I may also recommend also,
Yeah.
there's this book by Viktor Frankl.
Yep.
Viktor Frankl, it was a Jew who was almost killed in the Holocaust, but he survived and he hung on to life because he remembered what was dear in his life.
Mhm.
Basically, he provided himself with the meaning of life that was useful to him. So I can say that Stoicism, we can still learn a lot more from other schools. In
Mhm.
fact, you can and you should. It is recommended that you read from rival schools in order to compare and contrast what's the differences between Stoicism and Epicureanism. For
Mhm.
example, Epicureanism is all about avoiding pain,
Mm.
live a happy life, but the
Mhm.
Stoics disagree. It's all about how you get through that suffering, not to live a wonderland.
Yeah. Not suppress it for sure.
Mm, mm.
Okay. Thank you for that. Let's go to our next question. So I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Ainel.
Yes, I know.
Ainel asks, does Stoic philosophy also mean to not give a fuck? Excuse me.
um, yes and no, because like I've already explained about the indifference, we should not avoid them entirely. So we should not give our attention to things in which we become dependent on, but instead we use our judgment in order to shift the value on what is important towards others and accordingly give that value. For example, we put value towards our loved ones, our boyfriends, our girlfriends, wife, husbands, children. But there's this also meditation called the premeditation of adversity,
Mm.
which means in the darkest sense, you meditate for them being gone.
Yeah.
You meditate for them for their death because part of nature is also the impermanence of things, that things don't last forever and living things will also die. It's kind of grim when you think about it, but the purpose is not to make you scared of losing them, but
Mhm.
on the contrary, is to make you accordingly treasure them and cherish them whenever they are still here.
Mhm.
And that it will also help you to set back your expectations of them lasting forever, so that when they're taken from you, you're not completely down from that.
Mm.
So I just told you one meditation technique there.
Yeah. Premeditation for adversity.
Yes, it's a term by a modern Stoic called Massimo Pigliucci. He made some videos and he made some articles. So if you're interested about Stoicism, you can also learn from his articles.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great to have another resource to dive this topic deep into it. Okay, so moving on to our next question, also from Aino, and is it a he or she? Is it it? Is it a she?
This is she. Yes, this is she.
Sorry, Aino. But Aino asked,
Yeah, no problem.
nice to meet you. Can Stoicism be used for other psychiatric conditions? For example, OCD? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I actually got 2% asking me this question.
Mm,
But
popular.
as a preface, I'm not an expert. I'm not a psychiatrist, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. And if you are having troubles with yourself, it is highly recommended that you don't just take stoicism on the side, but you also go take therapy. I would really recommend you to do that. So yeah, So regarding other psychiatric conditions such as OCD, so I'm in Stoic groups in Facebook, right? So once in a while, I get anecdotes from people who are having similar conditions, OCD, schizophrenia, and to them, it is helpful for them while they're also undertaking their therapies because it's just the techniques, the wisdom in Stoicism can help them regain their focus towards themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So once in a while, where they are afflicted by whatever in their mind, right? So Stoicism can be a reminder and something to get a hold on whenever something bad happens to you,
Mm-hmm.
and to also remind you that you are actually stronger than your conditions.
Mm,
It's also inspiring.
it is.
So yeah, it is also recommended to also take Stoicism also when for other kinds of ailments, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's important that you mentioned that it's um, important to seek for professional help when you know you need it. And it has
Exactly.
helped me a lot through my process, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who
Mm,
needs.
exactly.
Perfect. And something quite similar towards, well, it's not similar through obsessive and compulsiveness from OCD, but Pandu asks, why are some things more addictive than others?
Okay, so he was actually asking why is this favorite game of mine, which I usually play with him. He asked, why is this game more addictive than the others? So I can actually explain by the Socratic terms because Socrates said that you are doing things because they are the right thing to do,
Mm,
because they are useful to you, because they make you feel good. Similarly, we are addicted to several things because we feel like they're the right thing to take for us.
mm,
Hmm. But in here, usually addiction carries a negative connotation, right? Because when you're addicted, you lose self-control of something. To Stoicism, maybe I can actually argue that it's neither good or bad
mhm.
because you know the term called the golden rule, the moderation
Not as much.
by yes.
No.
So Aristotelian ethics called they encourage you for moderation, so not too much of something.
Mm,
But Stoicism doesn't believe this because in Stoicism, for example, it doesn't make sense that there's too much of doing the right thing or the good thing,
mm,
right?
yeah,
So too much of a good thing is actually good
yeah.
as long as yes, it's actually reasonable to undertake them.
Mm-hmm.
It is also maybe you can also argue it's never a bad thing to be compassionate to everyone. Maybe there are assholes that are around you, but sometimes you just contemplate in this world and the universe, you know. This is another meditation techniques while we're at it.
Yeah.
We also contemplate the roles of other people. Sometimes there are people that are childish, they are very angry, they are easily upset, but you must contemplate that they must necessarily exist in this world.
Mm,
Hmm. Just like justice. Justice exists because there's injustice. One cannot exist with the other. So your role in this world as the person who knows better is to try to correct it, try to teach them how to be better, because that's probably what humanity wants first and foremost.
wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. That's all amazing. I think you're answering these questions really, really well. And
Mhm.
thank you for that. That's amazing. I would like to end this very lovely podcast and conversation with last question for me. I know I've asked actually all the questions throughout this podcast mostly, but I would really like to know
Mhm.
if you have any favorite quote by one of your favorite Stoic, and what does it mean in your life?
Oh wow. Okay. So the code was really long, but I really like it because when I discovered Stoicism and I stumbled upon this quote, I was having a really hard time adjusting myself.
Mm,
And then this quote was meaningful to me because whenever I'm feeling down, I can always rely on it to go back to it and feel better. Would you like me to recite the quote?
Yes, please. That was my
Okay.
question. So I would be very excited to hear.
Okay. It is quite long, so maybe later in Instagram you can repost it.
Yeah.
Okay, so here goes. The quote was said by Marcus Aurelius in his book 4. He said this: "Be like the rocky headland on which the waves constantly break. It stands firm, and around it, the seething waters are laid to rest." So it gives you also imagery of your of what you should be, a rock that's unhindered by the waves that come into you. But the next part is my favorite. So you might say that it is my bad luck that this has happened to me. No, what you should rather say is, it is my good luck that, although this has happened to me, I can bear it without pain, neither crushed by the present nor fearful of the future. Because such a thing could have happened to any man, either good or bad. But not every man could have borne it without pain. So why see more misfortune in the event than good fortune in your ability to bear it?
Mm.
Or in general, would you call anything a misfortune for a man which is not a deviation from man's nature, from man's reasonable faculty, and so on?
Mhm.
Or anything a deviation from man's nature which is not contrary to the person, to the purpose of himself? Well, you have learned what that purpose is. Your purpose is to uphold justice, to uphold kindness, to uphold fairness to others. And then you should ask yourself, can there be anything else in this happening which prevents you from being just, high minded, self controlled, intelligent, judicious, truthful, honorable, and free? Or any other of those attributes whose combination is the true fulfillment of man's proper nature? So, in all future events which might induce sadness, remember to call on this principle.
Mm.
This is not misfortune, but to bear it through to yourself is good fortune.
Wow. I'm gonna clap for that. Thank you so much. I have chills. I have little chills. Ah, thank you for sharing everything that you have known. Well, not everything, but a lot of things that you have learned through Stoicism. Thank you for sharing your experience. And I'm really, really happy that I got the chance to talk to you and to share
Mm,
this with other people because again, very similarly when we last saw each other in Amsterdam, I felt
mm,
like talking to you has uplifted me in a way that I didn't expect, and especially because we were talking about Stoicism, and I'm really glad that we
mm,
get to do this again. So thank you very much.
mm. Likewise. Um, how long has this talk been? It's quite long actually, right?
It is quite long. It is quite long, but it's okay.
Uh, yeah, and yeah, and I actually meant to give a lot more meditation techniques, which is because it is the main topic of your podcast, actually, right? So I kind of feel bad we're running out of time, but I hope that some of the things I said can be a good introduction or a good explanation when
Yeah.
you want to enter into Stoicism, perhaps in order to improve your understanding. You can, of course, always ask me. I'll be in Instagram with the tag Ferris. I'll be hanging around
Mhm.
there. I will always be glad to talk about Stoicism, to explain things that you may not understand, and so forth. But the things that I explained in this talk was usually also how I learned about Stoicism. Of
Mhm.
course, uh, I will not understand it without knowing the foundation as well, right? So that's why that was my goal of saying a lot about the foundation. It's quite a lot, but it's important.
Thank you so much, Ferris, for sharing that. I'll be sure to put your contact details, Instagram at Darth Ferris on the description. So if anyone would like to reach out to you, they could do that. And yeah, thank you again very much, everyone who is listening to us. I know this is one of the longer episodes, but I agree with Ferris that the foundations of Stoicism is important. And I also believe that it's not just about the quantity of things, but it's really the quality and the depth
Mm,
of understanding things, especially when you're starting something new.
mm.
And further, we can find more resources from the books that Ferris has shared, and I will put in the description. And yeah, I think that's all from us right now. And if you enjoyed listening to us or believe that there are benefits and inspiration that you have found from this conversation, please kindly follow this podcast on Spotify and also subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And I hope to bring even more beautiful conversations that is useful for your well-being, especially in these times. And take care. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Ferris, for your time.
Thank you as well for this opportunity.
Thank you. Namaste.